is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Paul Barber.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories.
Americans can have confidence that the banking system is safe. Your deposits will be there when you need them.
US President Biden says banking is safe as the country is rocked by yet another bank collapse.
HSBC steps in to buy the UK arm of Silicon Valley Bank in a transaction worth just £1 British.
Pledges over security and global cooperation bring China's 14th National People's Congress to a close. And
for all the little boys and girls who look like me watching tonight, this is the beacon of hope.
Michelle Yeoh makes history in Hollywood as the first Asian woman to win the Best Actress Oscar.
all customer money is safe. That's the message from US President Joe Biden after the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and the closure of New York-based Signature Bank.
Seeking to reassure the public, the president said the US banking system is secure and guaranteed that bank customers would have access to their funds on Monday. The president also said taxpayers will not be footing the bill for the failures.
The management of these banks will be fired. If the bank is taken over by FDIC, the people running the bank should not work there anymore. Third, investors in the banks will not be protected. They knowingly took a risk, and when the risk didn't pay off, investors lose their money. That's how capitalism works. And fourth,
well, let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, who's in New York. So, John, a rebuke there for bank management from President Biden. What else did he have to say?
Well, I've got to be honest with you, Robin and Paul, it's a bit touch and go at the moment, really. We think we've avoided a major US banking catastrophe. We think, but no one here is entirely sure at the moment. Biden's audience early this morning, before the markets got underway, was really twofold. One, the people here on Wall Street, and the other, the American people who must be wondering what on earth is going on with their banking system, because we've lost three in the last 5 days. We lost Silvergate, which was associated with cryptocurrency, late last week. And then, as you know, on Friday, we lost SVB, Silicon Valley Bank. This is a niche operation, a great deal of expertise in lending to venture capitalists, people in Silicon Valley who want to start up new healthcare companies, new technology companies, but it's been punching way above its weight for the last 40 years. And this is why we now have apparently the second biggest banking collapse in US history, even though the bank itself is very, very tiny. And now in New York last night, we lost Signature Bank, which went over because it's owed lots of money from people who've taken out loans to buy office space that they don't need anymore because of COVID-19. And they're also affiliated with crypto as well. And there's a couple of others out there too, which are rattling people at the moment, including First Republic Bank, whose shares are now down 64%. They were down 72%. They say they've got the money. Don't worry, nothing to see here. Move along the bus, please. But Wall Street is not too sure. So Biden's been reassuring people, saying he will do whatever he needs to do to make sure people get access to their money today, including small businesses that might need to make payroll. That was the big fear yesterday. It looked like many technology companies, including big names that you know and love, wouldn't be able to pay their staff this week. So that issue has at least gone away. He's right when he says there'll be no taxpayer money used. That's because the insurance corporation they're talking about, the FDIC, although it's government-backed, the money actually comes from fees paid by all the banks. And, of course, you heard him say their investors will not be protected, and that's a very democratic thing to say. In other words, you invested your money in the bank hoping to make squillions, and now it's gone under, so tough luck, mate, we're not bailing you out. That's basically what he said. So what have we got here? We had some pretty big falls today, including First Republic, 67%, Western Alliance, 75%, PacWest, 35%, Wells Fargo, that is a bit worrying, down 7.5%, JP Morgan Chase down 3%, Bank of America down 7%. So we don't think there's an overall run on the banks here. But, I'm afraid it's early days. We're still waiting to see what actually happens, guys.
So thoughts now turning to how to reduce the risks of this happening again. How are they planning to do it?
Yes. Well, I don't know, really, to be honest with you. I mean, fine words and all that. Well, no, everyone's saying the same thing. It's all fine words. You know, the president comes up because he has to come out and say these things. But, you know, people are genuinely worried. I mean, when you see Wells Fargo down 7.5%, that's a major, what Americans call Main Street bank, a high street bank. You know, it lends to real people. It's a big operation. So we'll just have to see. Now, Biden is saying we'll get full account of what happened and we will hold those responsible accountable. Yada, yada, yada. He's also saying we'll try to reduce the risk, and here he's referring to Dodd-Frank. But Dodd-Frank was the big bill that was drummed up in Capitol Hill after the financial collapse of 2008. It was supposed to stop what is happening now from happening. And irony of all ironies, Barney Frank, who used to be a congressman representing New York, is a board member, or was until yesterday, of Signature Bank, which has now gone under. You can't make this stuff up. So if we see a run on the banks in the Midwest and the West today, then we'll know that nerves haven't been calmed. I mean, I think they have been calmed on Wall Street. And if I may, just in 15 seconds, run so that you understand what happened here. Okay, because the SVB was a small bank. It is a small bank. And they lost $2 billion when they tried to finagle their finances and failed. The trouble is they have $200 billion on their books of other people's money. That's why we're calling it the second biggest banking collapse. And the reason it happened is very simple. Interest rates have been low for 15 years. They're now high. On top of that, you've got technology company demand falling back now that we're all back at work again after COVID. Technology companies cutting jobs, and the venture capitalists who fund these companies are hanging on to their money. And the bank realized there was a difference between what they could bring in and what they might have to shell out. And they tried to cover it up. They tried to do the best they could. They failed. Word got out. There was a run on the bank, and that's basically what started all of this. And it comes back to profits at the bank and interest rates in the wider U.S. economy. So it's likely to affect what the Federal Reserve does when it meets to discuss interest rates a week on Wednesday. Guys?
John, thanks very much for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
So British multinational bank HSBC has bought up the UK arm of the Silicon Valley Bank for just £1. That's $1.20 or thereabouts. The British government and the Bank of England worked through the weekend to put together the rescue deal, which did not involve any taxpayers' money. Well, let's get more on this now from our correspondent in London, Nina Potts. So, Nina, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was personally involved in these marathon talks over the weekend. He and many others will be very pleased that they did get this deal with HSBC.
Paul, there is an absolutely tangible sense of relief, especially among British tech firms and startups. But I think it's important to say that this HSBC rescue deal is a takeover, essentially, because it bought SVB UK for a nominal £1. I mean, the rescue deal certainly saves British tech firms and startups from major losses, but there is still a certain degree of caution and anxiety, and that has been reflected in the markets through the day, as you heard John say there. And there is intense anxiety about contagion. Initially, the Bank of England had said or decided that it would put the bank into insolvency. This rescue deal avoids that scenario, with the UK government emphatic that investors' deposits are safe and secure. But, I mean, I think we can't get away from the fact that this is still a very nervous time. HSBC, and whether it's a good deal for them, is Europe's biggest bank, and it certainly does it some reputational good, I think, to have stepped in, to have rescued the bank and its deposits at no cost to the British taxpayer. So on surface level, it's a win-win, certainly for HSBC.
Yeah, and you mentioned this caution and anxiety. John, they're saying it's still a bit touch and go. How much worry is there in the City of London about the wider health of other American banks and what could be just around the corner?
Well, I think the sheer speed with which the UK government reacted to Friday's news indicates how worried the British government certainly was and probably continues to be, although there's been this very robust message which doesn't differ much. It absolutely reflects the same message that we're hearing from the Biden administration, that there will be no contagion. But certainly on the UK banking landscape, there are bigger banks. I think the hope is that they have a much wider range of customers and they're not as specialist and small as SVB, and I think the message has been that it is possible to contain this small bank and to stop contagion from spreading. It's interesting to note that the UK government has at the same time just recently been weighing up whether or not to weaken regulation around the financial services industry, with a lot of analysts now saying this should be a stark warning that that is a very bad idea.
OK, Nina, thanks so much for that. Nina Potts in London.
Well, Susanna Streeter is Head of Money and Markets for Hargreaves Lansdown. Good to see you again, Susanna. So worth saying again, perhaps, that SVB, not a consumer bank, it's a bank that provides financing to tech companies, particularly startups. What do these kind of businesses need that they can get from a specialised bank like SVB?
Well, the reason why SVB saw its coppers swell before this all happened, of course, particularly during the era of ultra-cheap money, was because some of these tech companies found it more difficult to perhaps access banking activities with the other more mainstream banks. And really, SVB really did cater for the tech industry. So what happened is that once they got their funding from the venture capitalist community, that meant that they banked it with SVB. And unfortunately, it was the business model of SVB which came unstuck, because it wanted to make money from all those huge deposits and so put them into long-dated treasury bonds, so US treasuries, so government debt. And unfortunately, because interest rates went up so rapidly, you saw the value of those holdings plummet. And then there were these real concerns that actually it wouldn't have enough money to cover depositors. And that's why you saw effectively this run on the bank. Now, it's likely that other banking institutions will take on that business. Certainly, we've seen it here in the UK with HSBC doing so. But I think what tech companies are going to be doing right now is making sure that their banking activities are much more diversified, so they're not putting all of their eggs in one basket and risking seeing their deposits evaporate. Of course, there is this backstop now from the US Treasury, which did go some way to calm worries earlier today. But as we've been hearing, I think that confidence has evaporated as we've got now uncertainty surrounding other smaller banks.
So if we do lose more banks like SVB, how will that change the banking landscape and options for the kind of startups that had their money in them?
Well, certainly they're going to have to look elsewhere. And at the moment, the environment in terms of raising new funding is very difficult, is much more difficult for tech companies. The era of cheap money is at an end. Certainly, they may well find it more of a struggle to get the loans that they need. I think, though, now the focus has moved away from the ramifications for tech back towards the ramifications for the banking industry. Because what we've seen, there was mention there about the rollback of the Dodd-Frank regulations. Well, that actually came during the Trump administration. He specifically dismantled some of the checks and balances around those medium to small regional banks. And now it seems as though the chickens are coming home to roost because the stress tests were removed. They didn't have such high requirements. And that is why you heard President Biden today saying that he was going to go back to Congress and look at toughening up the legislation, because clearly there have been real weaknesses exposed through this, and we still don't yet know the full ramifications.
So as well as trying to sort out the regulations, President Biden obviously wanting to restore confidence, but do you think his message was strong enough to reassure the markets?
It certainly didn't do the trick of restoring confidence, and there is still a lot of nervousness around, and that's what you're seeing reflected in the sharp share price falls that we've seen, particularly for those regional banks that I mentioned, First Republic, for example, really plummeting in value, and also some of the bigger banks as well. There is a lot of uncertainty still hanging around. However, if you look across the wider market, interestingly, say the S&P 500 is much more supported, because now there is this expectation that actually the Federal Reserve will have to focus on financial stability. And so the prospect of the Fed raising interest rates more steeply, which was priced in just a week ago, is now evaporating. And there are expectations that a repressed pause will go ultra slowly with further rate rises. And that is supporting the wider market. But it does show that there is a lot of nervousness around, to the extent that the Fed may reverse its policies.
Susanna, great to get your thoughts today. Thank you for joining us. That's Susanna Streeter from Hargreaves Lansdown.
You can get the highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. Sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
Still to come on Global Business Europe. Planes in Germany grounded as airport staff in 3 major cities go on strike. We're live in Berlin.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
And welcome back. Stability, development and prosperity. That's the message from China's President Xi Jinping as China's annual political meetings come to an end.
He gave a speech at the closing meeting of the 14th National People's Congress at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. Our correspondent Huang Yue reports.
The Chinese president delivered a speech at the closing meeting for the first session of the 14th National People's Congress, China's top legislature.
The great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation has entered into an irreversible historical course. From now to the middle of this century, to build a great modern socialist country in all respects and to fully advance the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation are the central tasks for the whole party and the whole Chinese people. The relay baton of strong contributing and national rejuvenation has fallen in the hands of our generation.
China has entered a period in which strategic development opportunities, challenges, and risks coexist, alongside international uncertainty and unpredictability. The country is working with all its might to embark on a path to modernization that suits its own national conditions, making strides towards its second centennial goal of building a modern socialist country that is prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, harmonious, and beautiful. In the meantime, it's playing a more important role in the world, helping to build a shared future for mankind.
On the new journey of building a great modern socialist country and advancing the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, we should unswervingly advance high-quality development. We will fully and faithfully apply the new development philosophy on all fronts and accelerate efforts to create a new pattern of development. We will fully implement the strategy for invigorating China through science and education, the workforce development strategy and the innovation-driven development strategy. We should work to achieve greater self-reliance and strength in science and technology, promote industrial transformation and upgrading, advance coordinated urban, rural, and regional development, and foster green and low-carbon economic and social development. We should work to effectively upgrade and appropriately expand the economy, and continuously increase the country's economic strength, scientific and technological capabilities, and composite national strength.
This year's NPC session ran from March the 5th to the 13th. In the past week, the nearly 3,000 deputies elected Xi Jinping to be the president of the country and voted for Li Qiang to be nominated premier of the country. The deputies also voted to adopt amendment to China's legislation law. A plan to reform institutions under China's State Council was also approved, the most sweeping set of changes since 2018, with a focus on areas such as science and technology, financial supervision, and data management. The government work report set a series of goals for the country this year: 5% GDP growth, 3% inflation, 12 million new urban jobs, and 650 million tons of grain output. And the new leadership is expected to shoulder the responsibility of fulfilling all these tasks. This year's two sessions was of great significance not only because new leaders were elected and endorsed, but also because 2023 marks the start of the full implementation of the guiding principles of the 20th National Congress of the CPC. While the annual meetings have closed, the journey of the new leaders has just begun. They are carrying the expectations of the 1.4 billion people of the country who are looking forward to the rapid and steady economic gains and the confidence about the future.
China's new premier has made his first public address. Li Qiang said meeting the country's growth target of 5% for 2023 will not be easy, but he reassured private firms of the government's continued backing, as Huang Yue explains.
Right after the conclusion of this year's NPC session, the Chinese premier held a press conference, which is actually a routine of the annual two sessions. This was the first time for the new premier, and he responded to 10 questions in total, from the new government's priorities to the country's opening up policies. So as we know, China has set its GDP growth target at around 5% for 2023, and Li Qiang said that target was set following comprehensive considerations of various sectors, and it's not an easy task given new challenges this year. But he also emphasized that there are still advantages unique to China. For example, the market is huge, the industrial system is complete, the labor market remains strong. So achieving this growth target needs combined policies, he said, including macro policy, expanding demand, reform and innovation, and preventing and diffusing risks. And he said the basic orientation is stability, meaning to stabilize growth, employment, and prices. And in the government work report, China plans to create 12 million new urban jobs this year. And the premier told the press that the country's demographic dividends have not disappeared, and the talent dividend is gradually taking shape. So the country will continue to pursue an employment-first strategy and increase government support to boost job creation. And, the new premier used to work in eastern part of China's Zhejiang province, Jiangsu province, as well as Shanghai, a region known as the Yangtze River Delta, and is also recognized as one of the most developed regions of the country, where the private sector is very prosperous. So he said that he understands well about the expectations and worries of the entrepreneurs from private enterprises, and he also promised them a better future. Take a listen.
The second point I want to make is that private entrepreneurs or enterprises will enjoy better environment and a broader space for development. Standing at a new starting point, this government will continue to foster a market-based and law-based business environment in keeping with international standards, treat companies under all types of ownership as equals, protect the property rights of enterprises and the rights and interests of entrepreneurs in accordance with law. And we will create a level playing field for all kinds of market entities, and will make further efforts to support private entrepreneurs grow and thrive.
Li Qiang ending that report there from Huang Yue in Beijing. Well, Jens Eskelund is the managing director of container shipping giant Maersk's China business and vice president of the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China. Asked for his take on this year's political meetings in Beijing.
I think really there are quite a few takeaways. One of those that I paid notice was that there seems to be quite a bit of focus on the economy, a lot of encouragement for the private sector, which we'd like to hear. Also continuity, there were a lot of familiar faces in the administration. And then also quite a bit of focus on stability and security, in particular in regards to geopolitical tension. And that's, of course, something that also is a bit of concern for us as foreign companies, the tension that we are seeing right now around the world.
And so if we focus on the economy for a moment, how do you view China's aim to achieve 5% of GDP growth this year and to focus on domestic demand? Are these achievable goals? Do you think that they are welcome to companies like yours?
In my view, 5% actually sounds rather conservative. We have seen a fairly strong start to the year. We have seen the PMI coming out fairly strongly. And if we also look at other countries that have emerged after COVID pandemic, I think 5% is definitely within range. And I would not be surprised if it might hit even 6%. So, I'm pretty confident that 2023 will be a good year. I could be a little bit more concerned about 24 and 25. And of course, the big question is whether China really will get the consumption engine started again. We very much hope so.
Yes, absolutely. And another interesting point that came out of the legislative session was China's plans to intensify efforts to attract and utilise foreign investment. That must be welcome news for Western investors like you.
Absolutely, and I think the fact remains that China remains quite underinvested compared to the potential. I think it's interesting to note that Sweden invested as much in United States last year as all the rest of the EU countries were investing in China. So if you compare the figures of European investment going into United States, it's actually very, very limited what comes into China. And to me, that most of all signifies that there's actually a potential to do much more. So we welcome any initiatives that would sort of make that more attractive for European companies, definitely.
And Maersk is currently building a logistics centre in Shanghai, which will cost a whopping $150 million, I understand. So that's a very big investment. What is the state of the shipping industry? How is it recovering from the pandemic?
It has been quite a ride for the shipping and logistics industry. We have benefited for elevated rate levels for quite a while during the pandemic as all sort of supply chain issues put pressure on the supply of services. That situation has normalized now to the extent that freight rates are just a fraction of what they used to be, and also because we see demand both overseas and in China being relatively weak now. We of course hope that will improve at some point. And when we go out and do an investment like the one that we have just made in Shanghai, it is because of our belief in the long-term potential. We are not looking at just what we are seeing here and now in 2023 in terms of foreign trade. We do believe and have confidence in the long-term potential in Shanghai, the Yangtze River Delta, and China as such.
Chinese electric car giant BYD is ruling out the UK as the location for its first European factory, blaming the country's exit from the European Union. BYD is the world's largest seller of hybrid and electric cars and has now shortlisted locations in France, Germany, Hungary, Poland and Spain. Its CEO says he believes Brexit has destabilised the UK and it didn't even make their top 10.
The Chinese home builder Country Garden says it expects to record its first net loss since listing in 2007. The property developer, which sells more houses in China than anybody else, is blaming COVID lockdowns for a slowdown in the market. It expects a loss of at least $800 million for last year.
Porsche has recorded the strongest results in its history, according to bosses, with revenues and sales hitting record numbers last year. Profits revved up 27.4% to $7.3 billion as revenues topped $40 billion. China is Porsche's biggest market, accounting for nearly a third of total sales last year.
Pfizer is buying one of its rivals for $43 billion. The US pharma giant will pay over $200 per share for CGTN, a drug developer known for its research into lymphatic cancers. The sale is likely to attract scrutiny as regulators step up oversight ahead of patent deals expiring on some key products.
All commercial flights from 3 of Germany's biggest airports have been cancelled as staff go on strike for one day.
There are no departures at all from Berlin, Hamburg and Bremen, with 4 more airports, including Hanover, badly affected. Arrivals have also been severely limited. The Verdi union, whose members include security staff and aircraft maintenance workers, is in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions.
Well, our correspondent Trent Murray is at Berlin Airport for us. So, Trent, how much of an effect are these strikes having?
Well, Robin, we're being told officially 45,000 passengers at those northern airports have been caught up in today's industrial action, and it's not hard to see why at airports like this one at Berlin. It is very, very quiet. The self-serve check-in counters are closed, the security lines are practically empty, and you just have the occasional passenger coming here to speak to Lufthansa. Clearly, they didn't get the communication or read the email saying that it was not a good time to come to the airport. But this, of course, is part of a wider picture that we are seeing at those other airports, including Hanover, Hamburg and Bremen. That is not traditionally Lufthansa's 2 main hubs where all of the country's main connections take place. That is Frankfurt and Munich, and that has not been heavily affected by today's strikes. Staff are still working there, but the knock-on effect, the kind of domino impact, if you will, of the flight cancellations here, we understand, is having a wider impact on the network, and Lufthansa is saying it could take a couple of days for everybody to be reaccommodated. It is worth mentioning that because it's security staff that have walked off the job, departures are the ones heavily affected. There are no departures here at all today, but there are still some arrivals, some airlines opting to try and fly the passengers in, because obviously you don't need security to disembark the passengers, but they are then turning their aircraft around and flying it home empty back to base.
And Trent, we're not just talking about Germany, are we? Other countries seeing similar strikes?
That's right. We have a bit of a turbulent week ahead, I think, for both holidaymakers and business travellers, with more industrial action planned in other parts of Europe, including, importantly, I think, Wednesday, where you will see a number of air traffic controllers walk off the job that look after Paris Orly Airport as well as Charles de Gaulle. That is because of pension reform protests which are taking place in that country against the government of President Emmanuel Macron. We also understand that airline customers of Swissport in Spain are going to continue to walk off the job in coming days at 19 different airports, including Malaga and Madrid and Gran Canaria. Also ongoing disputes at Portugal's flag carrier TAP. Staff there having a pay dispute with the company. We have not got firm dates yet on any further strike action, but we are being told to expect more staff there downing tools. The advice right now from airports like this one is to get in touch with your airline, read online, check your emails to make sure you have all the appropriate information before travelling to the airport itself.
Trent, thank you very much. Our correspondent Trent Murray in Berlin.
Still ahead here on CGTN, a night of history-making at the Oscars. The movie about the multiverse sweeps up multiple awards in LA. Next.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, in the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and Paul Barber. The headlines again. US President Biden says banking is safe. The country is rocked by yet another bank collapse.
HSBC steps in to buy the UK arm of Silicon Valley Bank in a transaction worth just £1 British.
And pledges over security and global cooperation bring China's 14th National People's Congress to a close. In the war in Ukraine, heavy losses have been reported on both sides as the battle continues for control of the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut.
President Zelensky claims around 1,100 Russian troops, including mercenaries, have been killed in the past few days. Moscow says more than 200 Ukrainian servicemen have lost their lives in Bakhmut. There have also been civilian casualties.
A group in Hungary has been raising money to send ambulances and medical equipment to Ukraine. Russian attacks have caused serious damage to hospitals and emergency vehicles and killed scores of first responders. Our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez reports.
A refurbished ambulance purchased with small individual donations makes its way through the war-torn Ukrainian countryside. It's driven by Hungarian volunteers who are braving these dangerous roads to get it to the front line. It's not the first emergency vehicle these Hungarian fundraisers have bought and delivered since the conflict began. Gabor Prokay rushed to the border when the conflict first started, planning to help refugees, but after hearing a tragic story about a family caught up in the bombing in Ukraine, he started raising funds for ambulances.
The evacuation team tried to evacuate them, but with a civilian car, because they didn't have proper ambulance anymore, because it has been damaged or destroyed. And the 4 and the 5 years old children died in their mother's arms on the rear seat.
Within 10 days, Prokay and his team had raised enough money to buy the first ambulance. Since then, they have bought and delivered 5 emergency vehicles to the conflict zone, with 2 more currently being prepared for the journey to the front line. Ivan Bohar, a volunteer with the group who has delivered medical supplies to Ukraine, says these vehicles have become targets of Russian attacks.
The Russians fight against the ambulance.
They attack them.
They attack them. Yeah. For example, I think it's this car will have a new cover, green one, because when the Russians saw red Crocs, they fight it.
According to the World Health Organization, since the conflict began, 442 Ukrainian ambulances and 218 hospitals have been destroyed. This ambulance will be sent to Ukraine in the next few weeks. Activists say it will assist with the relief efforts in the area of Bakhmut, where intense fighting still raging on. It will be outfitted with generators and medical equipment to perform emergency surgeries. Other European groups like Tour de Ambulance have taken shut-up Ukrainian emergency vehicles onto the streets of cities across Europe to raise awareness about the pressing need for medical equipment and ambulances to help shore up Ukraine's damaged health system. Moscow insists it is not targeting civilians.
The third and the fifth ambulances went to Kharkiv Oblast region, and they are using it there. One of them we sent to Chuhuiv. It's a city not far from Kharkiv, and as I know, it has been shelled almost every day.
Once this ambulance is filled with all the necessary medical equipment, volunteers say they will invite Ukrainian children living in Hungary to write messages of peace inside it. In Budapest, Pablo Gutierrez, CGTN.
A plan to supply Australia with nuclear-powered submarines is set to be confirmed under a defence pact with the UK and the United States. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his Australian counterpart Anthony Albanese are in California for talks hosted by US President Joe Biden. The three-way partnership known as AUKUS was signed in 2021 and will also see US and British crews carry out training programmes in Australian waters.
Junior doctors in the UK are starting a 3-day strike over pay and conditions, the latest in a series of public sector walkouts. Junior doctors make up around 45% of the workforce of the UK National Health Service. It comes ahead of a series of strikes by several trade unions, scheduled for Wednesday, time to coincide with the announcement of the government's budget.
Teams in Bangladesh investigating a fire at the world's largest refugee camp say it was a deliberate act of sabotage. The blaze at the Cox's Bazar camp last week left 15,000 Rohingya refugees homeless, although no one was killed. Authorities say there's evidence that Myanmar militants may have infiltrated the camp, which is home to over 1 million ethnic Rohingyas.
DPRK state media says 2 strategic cruise missiles were test-fired from a submarine on Sunday. It comes as South Korea and the United States start 11 days of joint military exercises. The report says the underwater operations forms part of the country's nuclear deterrent. South Korea has put its military on high alert in response.
The BBC has reinstated a football presenter after he was suspended over comments on his personal Twitter account. Former England footballer Gary Lineker had said government language about migrants arriving by boat was not dissimilar to language used by Germany in the 1930s. The BBC, which is publicly funded, said he'd breached its guidelines. It will now launch a review of its social media rules, in particular how they apply to freelancers like Lineker working in non-news output.
Now, the multiverse was the talk of the Oscars in Los Angeles, as Everything, Everywhere, All at Once picked up 7 awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. The star of the film, Michelle Yeoh, won Best Actress for her portrayal of a Chinese-American laundrette owner connecting with different versions of herself in parallel universes. Co-stars Jamie Lee Curtis and Ke Huy Quan took home the Best Supporting Actress and Actor awards.
And that means that Michelle Yeoh makes history, becoming the first Asian woman to win Best Actress. Accepting the award, she took aim at ageism in the acting industry.
For all the little boys and girls who look like me watching tonight, this is a beacon of hope and possibilities. This is proof that dreams dream big and dreams do come true. And ladies, don't let anybody tell you you are ever past your prime. Never give up.
Well, Karen Krasanovic is a film journalist, broadcaster and writer. I asked her why it's taken so long for an Asian woman to win the top award.
Why has it taken so long? There's many, many reasons why. But it takes somebody like Michelle Yeoh with the body of work and with the kind of variety of different roles that she's played, and in large blockbuster films as well as smaller films, to really punch a hole through this with a film that was really written for her, with also exceptional cast members. And this is what we all needed.
And an Oscar too for Ke Huy Quan, a record number of nominations for Asian people this time round. What do their wins mean for Asian representation on our screens?
I think it's extremely positive. Granted, we have to look back at Slumdog Millionaire, which won 8 Oscars. I don't know if that really helped the situation back then. That was 2009. But now I think what we're seeing is we have to look at the whole cast. We've also got James Hong, who, although he wasn't nominated, has almost 500 acting credits to his career. And when anybody that watches movies sees him, we know who he is. We know who Michelle Yeoh is. And so it's just a matter of seeing these performers as just people, as just characters, rather than ethnicities.
Let's talk a little bit about the older generation for a moment. The big acting awards all went to people who were perhaps slightly older, let's say. A big night for representation in that area.
Yes, well, as somebody said, just imagine, the Oscars are 95 years old. Just think about what your grandfather was like, and what his opinions were like at 95. They're trying to keep up. I mean, Everything Everywhere All at Once is a real Gen Z movie, so it's embraced by a younger market. But all the acting winners are over 50, and that is something that Oscar really likes to do. The Academy does have a huge diversity in its pool of about 10,000 voters. But a lot of them still, we're all a little sentimental. When we see Jamie Lee Curtis, we think about all the horror movies she was in, or Ke Huy Quan, about how much we love him, what an energetic man he is. And, I just think that that's why we are getting this mix of sort of older people that we recognize, and then also this fresh information.
You are watching CGTN. Still ahead. Building Bridges, the Spanish entrepreneur who found inspiration in the teachings of Confucius.
Roger, Ricky, last clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
As China embarks on a new journey of modernization, the National People's Congress, China's top legislature, and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, the top political advisory body, convene their annual sessions in early March. Join us on CGTN for our special coverage of the 2 sessions. Find out the course China will take to ensure a sustainable future for its 1.4 billion people, and how China's decisions will impact global economic recovery. Agenda for 1.4 billion on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. Over the past year, we've brought you stories of the bridge builders who overcame cultural differences to bring people together.
That's right, and today, as we mark the 50th anniversary of China-Spain relations, we meet Marcelo Munoz, the first Spanish entrepreneur to do business with China after it opened up back in 1978.
Llevo 45 años trabajando con China. Creé la primera empresa española en China. Presumo, hoy soy el único español que ha vivido desde dentro de China toda la transformación de este país en los últimos 45 años. Llegué en 1978, he estado yendo a China cada 3-4 meses durante muchos años. Hay que tener en cuenta que en España salíamos de la dictadura franquista. No había empresa española grande, la economía española estaba hecha un polvo. Precisamente en ese momento, desde España, un grupo de colegas nos pensamos había que abrirse a la exportación. Y descubrimos a Deng Xiaoping con sus frases de la apertura y reforma. Lo estudiamos, en junio del 78 creamos la empresa y en octubre estábamos en China en la Feria de Cantón negociando ya y hablando con interlocutores chinos. He viajado más de 100 veces a China y he visitado más de 100 ciudades y multitud de aldeas, pues casi día a día ver cómo China iba cambiando. De aquella China a la que llegué en 1978, que era la potencia 120 del mundo, a lo que es hoy la segunda potencia del mundo y pasado mañana la primera. Cuando me paré en el mundo de los negocios, dejé de actuar hace unos 10 años como empresario, entre otras cosas, porque me obligó a ello un cáncer. Pensé, bueno, todo lo que he descubierto en China, que me parece riquísimo, tengo obligación de transmitirlo. Y entonces me uní con varios colegas que tenían esa misma experiencia, que habían vivido la realidad de China, la transformación de China, y con ellos creé un modesto think tank que llamamos Cátedra China, donde están estos 100 expertos de todos los multidisciplinares, porque hay de todos los, desde abogados, diplomáticos, empresarios, filósofos, todo tipo de especialidades están en esta Cátedra China. Y de eso sí me siento orgulloso, porque Cátedra China está siendo un puente real entre el mundo occidental y China. Occidente no acepta que China es una gran potencia, no aceptan a China como interlocutor para solucionar los problemas del mundo, por ejemplo, el medio ambiente, el cambio climático. China es el país que invierte en medidas contra el cambio climático más que Europa y Estados Unidos juntos. Y no se le admite como interlocutor para solucionar, frenar el cambio climático. El tópico de que Pekín está contaminado, de la gran contaminación de China, sin hurgar en lo que se está haciendo en China, que es la primera potencia en todas las energías alternativas, en todas. Si escojo algún dato de mi aprendizaje, lo pondría en esta palabra, el diálogo. La filosofía confuciana china es la filosofía que lleva o pretende llegar a la armonía a través del diálogo, del entendimiento entre distintos. El problema que tenemos los occidentales cuando llegamos a China es que queremos dialogar sobre la base de que acepten nuestro sistema, de que acepten nuestras ideas. Si no aceptan nuestra democracia liberal, China es condenable. Así no se avanza en el mundo. El diálogo es entre diferentes. Y hay que salvar con el diálogo las diferencias o aproximarse lo más posible. Esa capacidad de diálogo, quizá, o esa actitud de diálogo, quizá es, destacando entre lo que he aprendido en China, es el dato más destacable. Yo estoy intentando que el cincuentenario de las relaciones diplomáticas España-China se convierta en un programa de actividad hacia el futuro. La exportación española a China ha decrecido porcentualmente, no está en la nueva ruta de la seda, no acepta estar en esas terminales de la gran vía de comunicación. Entonces, estoy proponiendo, unámonos al proyecto de la nueva ruta de la seda, fomentemos la exportación. Y somos una potencia turística. ¿Por qué no atraemos 3-4 millones de turistas chinos a España? Yo marco en el cincuentenario, me fijo en objetivos que podemos alcanzar con relativa facilidad, únicamente que nos metamos en la cabeza que China es un mercado que necesitamos. Si el crecimiento del mundo en un 30% en los últimos 10-15 años se debe a China, nos hemos beneficiado todos. Luego somos tontos si no nos encargamos, nos ocupamos de ese puente con China para aumentar el intercambio, para aumentar el conocimiento y el apoyo y la cooperación. No pensando en la confrontación, sino pensando en el diálogo y la cooperación. Personalmente, para mí China ha sido una escuela que me ha ayudado a vivir el futuro. A mi edad, solo tengo 88 años, de los que presumo, en vez de ocultarlos, presumo de mi edad. A mi edad normalmente se está rememorando el pasado, contando las historias de los abuelos. No me interesan, porque China me obliga a vivir el futuro día a día. Y eso me ha obligado a no ser viejo, sino mentalidad de joven, abierto a las novedades que vienen todos los días y que he ido descubriendo viaje a viaje.
And for more of our Bridge Builder stories, you can go to CGTN Europe's digital platforms.
The headlines again before you leave you. US President Biden says banking is safe as the country is rocked by yet another bank collapse.
HSBC steps in to buy the UK arm of Silicon Valley Bank in a transaction worth just £1 British.
And pledges over security and global cooperation bring China's 14th National People's Congress to a close.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com and follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow though, same time, same place. From all the team in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.